out for the public interest.
Right, exactly.
All right. Let's talk about an op-ed in the LA Times that talked about your successor, and that's Sarah Huckabee-Sanders. In the LA Times, as I said, David Horsey writes this: by comparison, Sanders looks more like a slightly chunky soccer mom who organizes snacks for the kids' games. And just kind of looking at her physically, coming up with that assessment, in your mind, is that appropriate?
No. And I think Sarah does a phenomenal job. She is a great person, and I think it's interesting to me that so many of the media loves to take pot shots when they think things are out of bounds and inappropriate, and yet the deafening silence from so many of these same individuals that are so concerned when attacks get lobbed from members of the Republican Party, but when it's another member of the establishment media, a quote Pulitzer Prize winning, well-established journalist, makes these disgusting kind of comments about somebody's appearance, there is a deafening silence from so many of these other network anchors that are so easily appalled at so many other comments. I find it's interesting to me that the one-sided faux outrage that they have.
Sean, New York Times, Frank Bruni says, to listen to her, speaking of her southern accent, to listen to her pronounce priorities is akin to hearing the air seep out of a flat tire, and she leaves half of the consonants on the curb. Why isn't anyone calling out these individuals, these journalists that are saying such hurtful things that
they don't sound like
have
him?
Nothing to do with the job she's doing?
Right. Well, I think that has been the biggest disconnect between so many folks in the media and the past election. There was a clear signal sent that people were tired of the mainstream media's deciding how the world should work and what issues should be covered and how they should be covered. Luckily, there are places like Fox and other sites that are now giving people an option to hear other stories that are not being covered in a way that they're definitely not being covered by the mainstream media. I think that we have started to really see a divide in what gets covered and what doesn't, and the priorities of the mainstream media are not the priorities of where I think most of the American people are.
Did that kind of stuff bother you when you were press secretary, or was it more of the fake news, people spinning the story and changing the narrative?
I think there's a massive combination of it all.
Right. All right. Just very interesting. Real quick, SNL starts targeting her. Could that damage your reputation?
No, again, I think at the end of the day, people understand the angle that the mainstream media is coming at this from, and they're going to do everything they can to undermine the conservative movement, Republicans, and this administration. And I think you're clearly going to see, as you did on Election Day, November last year, is the American people are smart enough to understand how to get their information and make their decisions.
All right. Sean Spicer, lots to talk about today. Thank you very much for joining us from D.C.
You bet.
On Election Day.
All right. It is 7:11.